Welcome to Shamanic Voices, a podcast aimed at bringing our ancient, indigenous Nordic wisdom traditions and perspectives, bringing these to bear on the challenges that we face in our modern world. I am your host, Georg, and we will often be joined by co-hosts and producers, Brian and Lori. You can find our bi-monthly episodes on most major platforms. And if you enjoy this and like to read as well, please look up our blog with dozens of articles on health-related topics at www.teutonichealing.com. And now, let's get on with our show. Welcome to Shamanic Voices, where we explore ways to apply our ancient wisdom of the North, Finnish and Scandinavian theology, cosmology, and the indigenous religions of the North to modern issues, modern experiences, basically to provide ancient wisdom to help us with our modern lives. And today we will be, that is to say, Lori Callahan and I will be interviewing a very special guest, Cheryl Litke, who is a unique combination of talents. I've seen them in person, so I can attest to it, and that is being an animal communicator. I had always been curious and skeptical as to whether such things exist or not until seeing it firsthand. And folks, there's nothing like seeing it firsthand. And also a very gifted medium. I had lost a child last year, adult child, so exactly a year ago, actually. And Cheryl could put myself and my ex in touch with her as if she was standing right here, the same nuances, the same syntax. It wasn't like, oh, I think she's saying such and such. It was like speaking through Cheryl. I was very, very impressed, and very good exchange there. Anyway, Cheryl, tell us about yourself. I think probably what everybody's going to be wondering with my introductions, how did you get started with this? When did you discover that you had this ability?
Okay.
What's it like being you?
Strange. It's strange being me. Humans are all empathic. I just happened to be born way at the upper, end of that scale. I was extremely empathic. So I didn't really know anything else. I thought that's how everybody was. I had a very confusing childhood because I would often correct people and say, when they said something, I would say, well, no, that's not what you're thinking. I could hear what they were thinking. And I learned real fast that made people uncomfortable and I shouldn't do that, and to keep my mouth shut. So I was thought of as a very strange child. I didn't really trust people because I felt like they never said what they thought. So I ended up spending a lot more time with animals. Animals were my best friends. I liked them much better than people. They were very honest, very straightforward. You didn't have to guess. And so I think that from an early age, I really started to connect with animals, and my natural empathic abilities really started to lean that way. As I got older, I really wanted to help people, and I was very, very interested in psychology and therapy. I read all the magazines. I studied. I even went to college, for that. And I started trying to do people like therapy sessions. And what I realized was that all of these spirit guides and support people were showing up for them, and I could hear them. And so there were, angels and spirits and nature spirits and all different. The list is huge of people that would show up during therapy sessions, and I could hear them. And often someone that they had loved in life that had died was there for them. And I would say, oh, your mother is here, or your grandmother is here. And as soon as I did that, it seemed to be the only thing they cared about from that point on. They just wanted to talk to their loved one. And so I really started realizing that that is very healing for people. So I started trying to develop my skill that way as well. Um, the more I can put myself to the side and allow the person to come through as themselves, the more help it seems to be for people. So what I really learned to do was to become very humble and to set aside my judgments, my opinions, my what I thought was right, what and the more I could do that and just sort of become like a empty tube for the person to speak through, the more effective it became. And so I really I've noticed that people find like a little bit of peace. Losing someone is so hard, and they can find a little bit of peace connecting with that person and having that person be able to say that they're okay and that they're not in pain, that and what they're doing. So that's kind of the Reader's Digest version of how I got here.
I was curious when you mentioned animals. This may sound funny to you, but I'm not trying to be funny. I'm serious. Are some animals more honest than others?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. A lot of animals have sense of humor, and they think it's really funny to lie, basically, not tell it. So I have to really I have to get to know the animal a little bit and figure out if they're trying to, like, some of them just think it's really funny to play jokes, play tricks on humans, especially their owners. So yeah, I have to figure.
I think of a friend of mine who's a big He-Man type, runs a construction company, and he just loves cats. He doesn't care much for dogs. So he's got, I don't know how many cats in his house, probably 6. And I went over there one time to feed his cats when he was going to be going to a concert in Montgomery. And the alpha female said, "Hey, we are just starving. He hasn't fed us all night." I was like, "Poor thing." So I got out the really good wet food, and some of them just kind of sat there like, "Oh, I'm not hungry," and others just went and chowed down. This is weird. So I was talking to him later. I said, "Dude, I thought you told me you were going to feed them before you left, and by the time I got there at 5 p.m., it would be time to feed them again, but they weren't going to be all that hungry." He's, "No, man, I fed them before I left, just like 6 in the morning. They shouldn't have been hungry." I said, "Well, they lied to me."
Yeah, they do, especially animals who are very, very food oriented. They'll do anything to get that food. Animals, they're a lot more instinctual than humans. And so some animals are very food oriented, some animals are very prey oriented. Some animals, like I had a border collie who was a workaholic, and she would lie to so that I'd let her do, things that. So yeah, they will lie to it, and everybody knows a fat cat, right? So
Yeah,
there are cats who don't want to do nothing but eat. So yeah, she lied to you because she wanted food. So they're
oh,
not above that at all.
yeah, that was funny.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I was very impressed when I had that session with Betty, the people who own the wellness clinic down there's dog. And when you came in, they wanted to check on Betty. It was as if you had sat in there in the room with me and her, and there wasn't anybody there at the time I did the work with her. So I was, you really were picking up everything you said she was saying was exactly what had gone on. That was remarkable. Does it sound like a voice? Do you hear, or do you just an impression? How is it?
Um, okay. So it's different because it's not really, I don't hear them speak like a human speaks, but I have developed a communication language with them that has to do with all kinds of things, pictures, emotions, feelings, so it's a very complicated language, but I've practiced it a lot. But for instance, with Betty, that was easy because I have a relationship with Betty already. I knew her very well. And
Yeah.
so it was easy for her to tell me everything that happened because she and I had already established. I mean, I've known her for a year. I've spoken to her pretty much once a week for a year. So it was easy for her to tell me exactly what had happened. Now, with animals I'm just meeting, the more I talk to them, the better I get because I get to know them and I get to know because each animal can have their own sort of nuances to the language, and I have to learn those. So,
That makes sense. So in dealing, let's say, with a cat who had separation anxiety, which I've certainly had people told me about that, it might take more than one session to really tune into Her Highness or His Highness to help them process that, right?
yes. One thing that people don't seem to understand is like something like separation anxiety. I can definitely help with that because the animal can tell me what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. But if it's something physical, they can tell me where it hurts, but they don't have all that great an understanding of why it hurts.
Sure.
And so, like, if in order to affect a change in an animal, they have to be, first of all, they have to be able to help me with that, and they have to be open to it. I run into animals that are not open to changing at all. And they really don't want to stop having separation anxiety because it gets them what they want. So I'll say to them, we'd like you to be more healthy and balanced. And they're like, no, thank you. I'm fine just the way I am. So they also have to be willing to change.
Sure. Just as human clients do.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this about how it works with communication with those who have departed. I have this one uh, patient who moved down here from New York City. When she was growing up, she had kind of an adjustment problem because she didn't know that she had this sensitivity. I think she said she was about 7 years old, was playing in a park with a friend, and her friend was talking about how sad she was because her mom was no longer there, had passed, and she said, "No, she's standing right here. She's wearing a blue dress, blah, blah." And she was describing her mom exactly whom she'd never met before. And she's talking to you, but she's frustrated because you won't hear her. And she's in there talking for her mom. And the little girl who was with her, her friend, started crying. And Cheryl had her name was Cheryl, also had no clue why this was happening. It took her a while later to realize that other people weren't seeing them. And so this was a huge thing for her learning how to see, learning those who were here in spirit form versus those who were here in physical form because they looked almost identical. What was it that way for you?
Um, no, actually, I was very lucky in that I don't see as much as hear. And so I feel like it was easy to look around and see no one physically there. And so I learned pretty quickly to start to distinguish between people who are there and people who aren't there physically. Now, if I close my eyes, which I often do, in my mind's eye, I can see that person and
Okay.
describe them to you. But I'm not, I mean, everybody has different skill levels and different things, and I'm not very skilled at the visual. So
Okay. Well, how long have you been doing the mediumship with people?
probably 20, 25 years.
Okay, it's kind of a trick question. I'm not trying to back you in a corner here, but I think the question every one of our listeners is going to be thinking right now is, if she's heard from this many people on the other side, Cheryl, what are the common things that they tell you about life on the other side? Because we know there is life on the other side.
There absolutely is. Yes. I mean, yeah, I've always known it. I've never really understand why people didn't believe it. But so the common things are they have choices. They are continuing to grow. They are continuing to heal. They have support in those things, and they can do what we would think of as sort of jobs, but they can do something. They can be busy. There one thing in particular that I have learned is that they grieve losing their life, and that isn't an instantaneous thing. And often I tell people someone will die and they'll want to talk to them immediately. And I say, no, you have to give them a little time because they're processing grief as well. And sometimes it takes them a very long time to process grief. Um, you know, they're allowed to pick and choose. Some people like to hang around and watch the people that they loved. Some people want to just check in and go do something else. So they're given choices. I know that when someone commits suicide, they're given choices about helping the people that they hurt process that pain. They say, if you want to go be with those people while they're experiencing the pain that you caused, it lightens the load ever so slightly for that person. But it's like a lot of penance really to have to watch this and watch what they've caused. But in the long run, they explain to them, this is a lot more healing and healthy for you if you're willing to face this and do this. So it's not like they're forced to do anything. They're given options. They say, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? But they also have a lot of support, love, and teachers who are good at explaining things to them, because they get to see things at a different level than you do when you see things from the physical level. You're not attached to physical things anymore. And so that stuff doesn't really matter very much to you. And it can elevate you and let you look at things from a more spiritual standpoint. And so they often choose to do a lot of spiritual healing, forgiving, and growth just because that burden of the physical world is kind of lifted off of them.
Have they expressed to you that they are under compulsion to come back here and go through the sewer of this existence again, or do they have a choice of staying where they are? How does that whole thing with reincarnation work from what you have been told?
It seems to be different for different people. Some people, and I think it has to do with their belief system. Some people who adamantly believe in reincarnation and think that's the only choice, I think they feel more compelled to come back. Other people have told me, no, I have been told I don't have to go back if I don't want to.
Oh,
But there are benefits to going back. And so they're strongly advised to go back because, um, you know, there's a thing that we can experience in the physical world called a pinnacle experience, where you combine something heightened on more than one point. So if it's heightened in physical, if it's heightened in mental, if it's heightened in spiritual, and you have these three energies all heightened, you have a pinnacle experience, which is a very strong experience. In the spirit world, you can't have any of that. You can have the emotional, you can have the spiritual, but it can't be amplified through the physical body, through that part of it. And so the experiences are always as strong. And so they are encouraged to come back and have a stronger experience because, let's face it, we're all very stubborn. And that's why pain is one of our greatest motivators to heal. Because when we're in a lot of pain, that's when we say, okay, yeah, let's heal. So they say, why don't you go back? And, because you're going to be much more motivated, you're going to be highly motivated. And that's a stronger experience. So they're advised to go back, but no one is forced. As far as I know, no one is forced.
okay. So they're encouraged to come back to have what Maslow called the peak experience, or what other psychologists call the oceanic experience, where everything feels heightened and you're highly stimulated on several planes of your existence simultaneously. That's an interesting thought. Huh.
And so they are encouraged because you can't have that there.
Now, I just did a paper in my blog with the following assumption, and let's see if it accords with what you learned about the other side, which is that the reason we are born with amnesia, like we really don't remember our past lives. 99% of us don't. Occasionally, some child is born who has a very strong memory of, I was such and such. My real name is Billy, not Bobby, whatever. And there have been well-documented cases like this, even in the West, more so in the East where it's acceptable, certainly more so in a place like India, where most people do believe in reincarnation, but that the reason we don't remember is because it would be too painful and too disorienting to remember, because so many of our experiences are painful. So many of our experiences involve loss, suffering, alienation, whatever you want to call it. And if we had to remember, there'd be a very little bit of good and a whole lot of bad to remember. And it would be paralyzing.
Yeah.
Do you think that's correct?
I absolutely do. As a matter of fact, I deal with people a lot who it turns out that the pain from a past life is so strong and so dramatic that when they hit that age or that point in life, it breaks through into their present existence and they have to deal with that. And so I absolutely believe that the amnesia is a gift that,
So the amnesia is actually a protection, a blessing.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the same. Okay, just wanted to check and see if that accorded with yours. What other observations do you have about what the other side must be like? I've heard some people, when I did a shamanic regression, say that the life between lives, or the life just before coming back here, was like being in a vast garden and having a lot of leisure time and no pressure to do anything, and just being able to explore, like the original meaning of scholare in the ancient Greek, which was meant leisure for the pursuit of enlightenment, leisure for the pursuit of reflection.
Yeah.
That's what school, believe it or not, originally meant.
Right. And the reason, and the way they've explained it to me, is because the reason why they can have that is because the demands of the physical have been lifted. And so that there is space for that. But their personality isn't dramatically changed. And so some person, even though they might be offered that, is nowhere near ready to experience it in the personality of the life that they lived. And so, you're not, they don't rip your personality away from you. You're still the same person. And so that's why I believe some people tell me, yeah, I'm like, it's like so free and happy. And other people say, oh, it's okay, but it's not, I don't feel free. And, because they're taking a lot of themselves, into that. And that's not a bad thing to retain your identity. I mean, along with that identity comes some pain, but it's a trade-off. And I think people do want to maintain their identity. And so you have to take the good with the bad, I think.
But of course, you're going to lose your identity when you reincarnate anyway.
Right, right.
But
To
you want to
some
keep
point.
it. But you can keep it while you're there. Yeah.
You can, yeah.
Okay. Fascinating stuff. What are some of the strangest communications you've had where you're speaking with the departed and you got the person in front of you who wants to talk to them? Do you ever have any really ironic things come up, like, child who's lost her mother, or mother who's lost her child, and suddenly when you pull up the person on the other side, they say, yeah, I really never much cared for you anyway, or anything like that? Do you ever have anything like that happen?
I have had that happen, but not such a close bond. I've had I actually, it was a couple of years ago, this woman who was really wanted to talk to a friend, and it took me several tries to connect with her. And when I finally did connect with her, she basically said, "Would you tell her to stop? Like, you're the third psychic she's gone to trying to talk to me, and I don't want to talk to her. I didn't like her in life. I don't like her now. I've got nothing to say."
Wow.
So absolutely, I have had that experience. Now, uh, the funniest things are really not with people, but with animals, because we create such stories around our animals, and we
Yes.
tell ourselves so many things. We humanize them to such a point that
Yes.
the funny things is, a lot of people will tell me, "Oh, my animal thinks this and wants that," and then I talk to the animal, and they're like, no, not really, So that's the I have to be very careful with that, because I hate to destroy anyone's, like, the love and belief about their animal, but the animals really can be very different from what we actually think they are.
And by the way, I just want to make clear to our listeners that you are available to do this kind of work for people, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just in case you're tuning in a little bit late, folks, I'm speaking with Cheryl Litke. And Cheryl, can you tell them how to contact you?
They can always contact me through my phone number, which is area code 985-515-9151.
Folks, you will know how to get hold of Cheryl to schedule an appointment for speaking with your long lost Cocker Spaniel, or your long lost cousin, or whoever it is you want to get hold of, or just finding out why your pet orangutan seems to be, not wanting to play nice with whatever it is. Yeah, that's very cool. I've had rare occasions when I felt a real simpatico with an animal. One time I was traveling when my wife and I were expecting our second child. We're going down to Florida, and we just wanted to get off the main roads and kind of see some of the back country. And we're, I guess, near St. Mark's or someplace like that on the Gulf Coast, the West Coast area, and got on this little gravel road. And there was this probably 5-foot alligator just sitting across the road, just sunning himself, just chilling, having a good time. And I thought, some idiot's going to come along with a logging truck and run this critter over. So I put my flashes on, and my wife at the time says, "Greg, what the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Well, he's going to get killed." "Well, it's just a damn alligator. Why don't you run over him yourself?" I said, "No way in hell." "So what are you going to do?" "I'm just going to go move him." So I stepped, encouraging him to move, got a stick and tried to, and he didn't want to move. So I just finally said, "Listen, fella," I just told him mentally, "I don't mean you any harm. Just work with me. I'm going to put you off the side of the road so nobody kills you, okay?" So I reached under him, picked him up, and just set him over there. I guess he probably weighed about 80 pounds. I was in really good shape at the time, so 80 pounds was not a big deal. And I got back in there, "Don't touch me with those hands." One of those deals. But hey, the alligator barely moved. I just moved him over. We were good, and we drove on, and
Wow, yeah.
and my daughter remembered that. She was about 5.5 at the time. She said, "Yeah," she to that day, till her last days, remembered that incident. But just those occasional things where you just know it's not words, it's just a sense that we're going to be good, we're okay.
Yeah, yeah. Wild animals can be tricky, but I have often felt that that they accept me telling them, I'm not here to hurt you. I want to help you. Now, ants, I have had zero success with ants. I have ants come into my house and I say to them, "Look, guys, you need to leave or I'm going to put down poison. I can't have ants all over my house." They do not care. They never listen. So I have tried over and over and over again with ants, and they don't care. But I have, and there are other people too. I mean, animals, their communication is not verbal, and so if you can send out that energy, they often can pick it up because they're used to communicating energetically. So it's it definitely can happen with wild animals that you can have that moment.
Well, speaking of other species, when you have been in the spirit world and you've been communicating with the departed, what are some of the unusual entities, not speaking of the departed souls themselves, whom you have encountered?
Well, I think some of the most unusual ones I call nature spirits. They seem very small to me, and they often are like attached to a specific spot or a specific tree or something like that. They're very comical, but yet they can be very attached to people and care about people, but they're very different from humans, and so it took me a long time to really develop being able to have a conversation with them. They're just very foreign to how we are. They are a lot more natural, and but I love them. Now that I have experience talking to them. I actually, whenever I'm out, sometimes it's interesting. People I know will have a garden and maybe they'll have a rose bush or something that isn't doing so well. And I'll often look for the nature spirit and ask the nature spirit, "Why is this plant not doing well?" And they'll tell me. So that can be.
This was the worldview of people before Christianity, and of course it became illegal to have that worldview afterward because everything was suppressed except what was in the Black Book. But the idea that there were, in ancient Finnish, you would say it was an emu, E-M-U-U, and emu was the spirit of a particular species, like there are the emu of cats, the emu of dogs, or, whatever species it is. And if I'm working with one as a healer, I'll actually ask for the emu of that particular species to help me communicate with it and work with it. And above all, to show me what's wrong with it. So, because I'm used to dealing with human physiology as a healer to know what I'm supposed to do for it. But it's the sense, I think, in the ancient world and in the pagan cosmology that everything is alive. So your house has a haltia.
Yes.
Your if you have a sauna, there's a special word, sauna on tomtu. Tomtu is a living spirit. Haltia is a living spirit, and I would say and Megan is the power behind those spirits. So it was well recognized, certainly throughout Scandinavia, that everything is alive. Everything has a spirit with it, and you're communicating with those spirits if you're a shaman or a healer of any sort,
Yes. So you reminded me of two stories. The first one is, you said everything has a life, which I definitely have come to believe. And my sister has a real attachment to her car. She loves her car, and she was taking the car in to be worked on, and she was very worried about it damaging the car's, the car's personality or whatever. And she asked me to speak to it, and they told us to take a piece of copper wire and make a coil out of it and hang it somewhere. She hangs it on her rear view mirror so that when the car is worked on, the energy of the car's awareness goes into that coil of copper wire. And when they're done working on the car, it goes back into the car. And so we have come to believe that everything is alive and has awareness.
Well, I like that better than the bronze baby booties you used to see down here.
Yeah. Yes.
Or the fuzzy dice.
Right? Oh yeah, absolutely. So when I did a lot of hiking, and I spent a lot of time in the woods behind my house. And one day there was a tree that has grown on the side of this ditch, and it was quite an elderly tree, and it fell. And I was devastated, and I went to the tree and I said, "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry." And the tree was laying, horizontally. So I climbed up on it and I was like, "I am so sorry. I'm sending you all this love. And I hope that, I'm sorry that you're going to die." And the tree said to me, "Get off of me. I do not need your negativity. What's wrong with you? I'm fine. I'll just go on and do something else. This isn't the end of me. I don't know what you're going on and on about, but I don't need your negativity. So please go away."
Wow. Fascinating.
So I was like, "I'm sorry."
I've got a little copse of three, I think two are elms and one is an oak at the corner of my lot. And it used to be just wild acreage on three sides. Unfortunately, it's been developed since in recent years. But I knew it was an elf gate because when my daughter was young, she'd go up and talk to the elves. And my son could see them also and detect them and hang out with them when he was younger. And I had a friend of mine over here one time with when this doctor friend was up from South America, and we all went up there. I was going to introduce them to the elves. And my friend was dating a lady who was definitely, he kind of scraped the bottom of the barrel. I think she probably had multiple drug complications and all that. And so we got up there and she's just, being very sarcastic about, "Oh, you're going to meet with elves." I said, "Yeah, actually." And it was autumn. It was a nice time to go up there where you're not going to run into snakes. You're not going to run into mosquitoes. It had just been cold enough, like it froze the night before. Good time to be up there, nice dry leaves. So we all sat in a circle. I said, "Let's just be quiet and still, and you'll know where they're here." So she says, "Well, how will you know?" I said, "You'll hear them." "Yeah, right," like that. Suddenly we heard these little footsteps walking around us on the outside periphery. She got up and ran back into his car and wouldn't come out. And I said, "Well, man, if you need to go with her, go." He said, "No, that's her problem, not mine. I'm here. I'm loving it." So multiple times people run into them there. And on another occasion, I had this very good younger friend of mine who was in the Marine Corps at the time. He'd been psychic his whole life, which you can imagine how hard that is being a Marine. I can't even imagine that. But anyway, he I forget what it was. I said, why don't you go just introduce yourself to them and make an offering? He said, like what? Kind of sarcastic. I said, just take a little ramekin. I've got some honey, I've got some milk, and this is where the whole phrase milk and honey comes from, is keeping the land spirits happy. You're offering them something from the animal kingdom, something from the plant and flower kingdom, the honey, which comes from flowers, of course, mix it together and put it up there. Well, it snowed early that evening, right after he put it up there, pretty heavily, about 8 inches of snow, 8, 10 inches. And I said, well, why don't we go up there and check on it? He said, well, you know damn well it's going to be there, or you'll see where some squirrel came along and ate it. I said, don't be too sure. So we went up there, and here was this empty ramekin, pristine snow around it, nothing. She said, okay, I'm a believer. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Some people are pretty hard to convince, but when they see things for themselves,
Yeah.
they have to accept that there are things out there that maybe we don't completely know about or understand.
So then he goes and marries a woman who naturally all her life has been able to communicate with him. And they would just go some places like they lived up in Virginia at the time, up near the James River, real pretty trails and all that stuff up there. And she says, oh, this is a place. There was a felled over hickory tree kind of growing at a 45-degree angle, like where you could sit. I was alive, but it clearly been knocked over in a storm or something, continued to grow. So I'm supposed to sit here and don't look back. But in a minute, if you do look back, I won't be here. They want me to go visit with them. And he goes, yeah, like, okay, I'll humor her. She's just, yeah, all right, just being her. Well, he sure enough walks along, calls her name, no answer, turns around and looks, and she's not there. And she could do this her whole life, just go to their kingdom, would never remember what, but she knew it was the elves. Didn't know what they did, came back without a memory of it, which I thought was very interesting.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And yet she's a science person. She is a pharmacist. So,
I find that science and the woo-woo can coexist because
oh,
you're
yeah,
closer together all the time.
I agree. They totally can. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I've got one patient who's a pharmacologist who, definitely was in contact with a couple of dragons and can talk to other animals quite easily. Not like you can, but like if it's her pets, she kind of knows what they want and all that, on a communication level, not just a growl or bark for it, type of level. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I always tell people that, you have such a close link with your own pet. You love them so deeply. I try to guide them to how to be open to hearing the communication from them. Because if you're open to it, they'll continue to try and do it. If you're closed to it, they stop. They don't continue to try.
That's true. And there are big differences between one animal and another.
Yes.
I had this one cat who was a real ass-kicking tomcat, big old Turkish van, close to 20 pounds, and he didn't take stuff from anybody. I was taking him for a walk one day, and this pit bull came out to challenge him. He just stood there and looked at it like, come on, bring it, and he was 100% sincere. I'm glad he didn't, because I'd have been paying damages to the owner of the pit bull. There's no question about it. I mean, but with me, he was the kindest, sweetest cat. And I remember having jaw surgery, and he just came and slept with me that night, started purring. And I was laying on my right side. It was on the left. And he just put his paw right there where it was and woke up with no pain and no inflammation the next day. He knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And he was the least likely. I think there's just a natural thing cats have of wanting to heal their owners, Well, I say their owners, they're butlers or whatever we are. We're not exactly owners. Right?
Yeah, do you ever really own a cat? You coexist
True.
with a cat.
Oh, yeah.
But dogs also do want to heal their owners. And I've known many dogs that will take on ailments from their owner, especially stress. It's like they'll try to drain stress, but they also will try to drain physical pain and ailments from their owner. Animals are incredibly loving and do try to help. I mean, you're right. Animals are so different. They're as varied in personality as people are. but I find that generally animals are more loving than people.
Yeah, it really like very, very difference between individuals. I had this one named Buzz. Interesting story how she got that name. I came home from work one day and she was acting really goofy and walking around the house, stumbling into stuff. And she had this green fuzz around her mouth. And she's sick. What the hell did she get into? And she kept walking around the house. So I started following her. And she walked back to my son's room, and under his bed, she went under there and came out with more of the green fuzz. What's wrong with this cat? I reached under, and there was this big old bag of weed, and she'd gotten into the weed and eaten it. And she was so buzzed. She had the munchies for hours. She didn't come back down for, I would say, close to 24 hours. And we had been wondering what to name her. She was just a kitten at the time. So that's where she got the name Buzz, because she was buzzed for so long. But she was a total healer. I mean, years later, I had a couple come over from Georgia for a bunch of stuff that needed to be done. And one of the last things on the list that the couple had, the woman had a really bad pelvic inflammatory disorder. And I just had her laying down on the table. Her husband was sitting right beside her, and Buzz just walked up to her. And I said, okay, if she lays on you, I knew psychically she wanted to lay on her. She said, sure, I love cats. Okay, so I didn't want her to do it without her permission. She lays on her, puts her head down toward the pubis, her tail is up toward the solar plexus, laid there for a while, and she's telling me about how tough it is having pelvic inflammatory disorder and all that. Buzz gets up, walks off, goes to the Bengstrom, which is the power spots like that your friends have at the center there. And the pelvic inflammatory disease went away like it had never been there. And she said, what the hell just happened? I said, and the woman who was here for healing is a chemist. I mean, she's a very science person, teaches at a university, okay, the doctorate of chemistry. I said, well, she absorbed your pelvic inflammatory disorder, but where did she do with it? So she took it to the Bengstrom, and the earth took it away from her. But she would do things like that if people allowed her. She would participate in healings. The only cat I've ever had that would do that. Quite an extraordinary little cat,
Oh, yeah. She sounds we should probably do a session to contact her on the other side. She's probably still helping you out. She's probably still hanging around, helping you with healing.
I wouldn't doubt it. And if you can help me contact her on the other side, I'd love to. She was the sweetest thing, just a real love, just a very nice cat. Anyway, so have you run across like fairies or gods or goddesses or heroes or anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. I've run across all kinds of interesting things, and often I ask them, about themselves, and I get very interesting information. I've been told that energy plus intent can create a entity, and so if enough people believe in something and put enough energy into it, even if it isn't real before, it becomes real.
I agree with you. And in the West, we call that an egregore. In the East, especially in Tibetan Buddhism and Sanskrit, it is called a tulpa.
Oh.
So it's a well-known phenomenon.
So I've met many of them.
Yeah.
Many of them. They're at my home in North Carolina. We picked this house because as soon as we walked onto the property, we knew there was something special about it. And it turns out that, underground is just one giant quartz field. It's just quartz everywhere. And we were told, that it is kind of a special place. And there is a warrior who is thousands of years old. And he told me that, when he was alive, his religion was earth-based, and so they believed that Mother Earth, was there like God, and so he will forever walk the earth in spirit form because that was part of his religion to believe in that. And he has educated me about some things. There's that I thought was very interesting. We live in Mount Gilead, North Carolina, and there's a mound there, a very old mound, and they talk about it. It's a tourist site, and there was a fence all the way around the mound, and they were not allowed to have any trees inside. And they always said, oh, it was for, so you didn't have to clean up the leaves. That's what the tour guides tell you. The spirit warrior told me the trees were not allowed inside because there were beings, Mothman, I think is what we call them now, that live in the trees, that if they didn't have trees inside, the beings couldn't jump over onto the trees inside. So it was kind of a war thing. And he laughed, and because he went on the tour with me, and the whole time the tour guide is saying, oh, this giant fence that they had was to keep out, other tribes. And he was like, no, 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 people traded with each other. There was no fighting between the people. It was these other creatures. And so it's like I hear all these strange stories and meet strange entities, and a lot of it I just tell my family and keep to myself.
And do you run into these when you're not doing communication with the departed, when you're not acting as a medium? Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, it can be very hard to turn it off completely.
Yeah,
is why I'm an introvert. It's hard to go to Walmart for me, because walking down the aisles, I pick up every single person's emotions, and it's hard to turn it off completely. I can dial it down, but until a lot of beings like that recognize that they can communicate with me, and so it's they come rushing over, they're like, hi, they're excited to communicate. So
sure.
yeah, so I get that a lot. It can be very distracting. Sometimes I'm someplace supposed to be doing one thing and I have a whole nother conversation going on. So
that has got to be distracting, being able to multitask your communications.
well, I can't. I'm a terrible multitasker. I usually tell one person to be quiet.
Okay.
Because I'm bad at multitasking.
Hey, can't you see I'm talking to the spirit of the guy who died in the stock room last week? Okay.
Sometimes I have to do that.
Talk to you later.
Exactly.
Josh, that must be interesting.
Interesting is one word for it. Yes.
Well, in terms of the healing aspect, I agree with you what you said initially on opening up this conversation, that, and I think I've experienced it myself with the work you did, that having a good medium help put you in touch with your departed loved one is a very healing experience. Can you give examples of where people experience a great healing from your making that communication possible for them?
Sure. There was just a couple of months ago, I was working with a young man who contacted me because he literally was desperate. He was suicidal, didn't want to live anymore. His father had died a year ago, and he felt very guilty and responsible, even though it wasn't his fault. And he just felt like he couldn't live with the burden of it. And he had done all these things, and he had decided to get a tattoo honoring his father on his shoulder. And then he felt guilty about that because his father didn't like tattoos. And so someone said that, recommended me. We got into the session, and I didn't know his backstory at all. I prefer to know nothing, because if you tell me anything, then I can't use that thing to validate that I'm actually speaking to the person you want to speak to. So I knew absolutely nothing. I wouldn't let him tell me anything. So his father came through and was crying and saying, that he was devastated that his son took this so hard. It wasn't his fault. He walked over to him and laid his hand on his shoulder, and he kept saying to me, tell my son that this is, love. And I kept asking him, why aren't you hugging him? And he was like, no, this is more meaningful. Of course, I didn't know anything about the tattoo, but when I started telling the son all of these things, he just burst out crying, and he sobbed for maybe 20-30 minutes. And at the end, he said he felt an amazing sense of peace. He believed his father. His father had convinced him, this is not your fault. I want you to live your life. Stop beating yourself up. And he really let it go. And he called me a month later and said, I'm a completely different person. I'm at peace and I'm moving on with my life. And he had started dating someone, and he really had let it go.
Cool.
So that's, and it's usually letting go. It's usually they can't let go. And so I experience a lot of people being able to, knowing that that person isn't gone forever, that they'll see them again someday, and that they're okay. And I'm putting that in quotation marks because, it's their version of okay, not our version of
Oh
okay,
yeah, of course.
can really help for people to let it go and move on with their life. So
I could see where that would be very healing. And it was really, there was a real blossoming of mediumship during the American Civil War, as you might know. All these seances were going on, and there was another blossoming during World War I, especially in Great Britain and France, where the losses were just so astronomical, way more than in World War II. I mean, they're bad in World War II. They're far worse in World War I as far as the sheer number killed. And so all these families were getting in touch with their sons,
mhm. Yes.
and I think it was probably very meaningful to them to have people like you could help them do that.
Mhm.
How do you avoid holding on to I'm assuming the departed are not experiencing this grief in most cases and are at peace, or at least working toward it.
Right.
How do you process the grief coming off the querent, the client who comes to you asking for communication? How do you avoid, as an empath, resonating or internalizing that?
You can't. If I try to avoid resonating or internalizing it, then I can't. I won't do my job. First of all, I have to be able to understand how much pain they're in to do what I do. If I didn't believe they were in pain, I'd say, yeah, you're fine. So I can't really disconnect from it completely. But I have over the years learned to put up boundaries, and so during the session, I allow that person in and I open up to them. But as when the session is over, I put up boundaries. And I used to have a working partner, Al, and he would really help with that. He would clear off any negativity, and he was my life partner. And he gave me a lot of love in those moments. He knew I was fragile and vulnerable, and he basically filled up the empty spaces with love. And so he was very helpful with that. It's a little more difficult on my own, but it is possible to do. I just have to be more present with it and make sure that I soak in a hot bathtub with Epsom salts. Believe it or not, that really helps me to.
Yeah.
Sea salt sometimes. It depends on what I'm trying to get rid of. But I soak, I shower, I, play music, and I take care of myself and fill up my space with what kind of fills up the spaces that I empty out with their sadness, with happiness, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, yes, of course, it really does. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very difficult thing for me to have to learn to be empathetic and yet have boundaries. But I realized, because they kept telling me, if you don't figure this out, you're going to burn out, and then you're not going to be any good to anybody.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's exactly how it works too. Yeah. You have to be able to process. I try to tell people I'm training the same thing, that you're going to be able to resonate your patient's pain, their disorder, their stiffness, their inflammation, whatever it is, to some extent. That's good. That helps you diagnose them. It helps you know where it's coming from, which sometimes is different from what the allopathic diagnosis is. But if you take on too much of it, you will become paralyzed with all that you'll take on. In addition to whatever's wrong with your body, you'll take on what's wrong with theirs as well. You can't go there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I was doing like life coaching, I learned that, some people just want to be seen with their emotional pain. And so if you can connect to it, and they know that you're feeling it too, that in itself can be very healing when it comes to emotional pain. Just knowing that someone acknowledges your pain and doesn't minimize it and feels it and knows how much you're hurting. So I find that, I really had to do that. But when it was over, I definitely had to create boundaries and give it back to them and let them deal with their own burdens and not take it on.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Well, again, I'm going to ask you to repeat your number, Cheryl. This is Cheryl, Litke, Litke, Cheryo, Litke. And that's who we've been talking to here for the past hour. And I'd like for any of you guys who are interested in, you got a pet that slaps you and doesn't want to eat, you probably want to talk to her. If you are really missing somebody that's on the other side and you want to get in touch with them, have a real genuine communication with them, she's your lady. Your number, please.
Area code 985-515-9151. Right.
All right. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us today here on Shamanic Voices. I think we may be back with Jane next time we do a broadcast with Shamanic Voices. Is that correct?
I think so.
Do we have her scheduled? Okay, I thought so. So we'll do the final episode to see where Jane ended up in her long autobiographical sketch that we're doing. And then we'll be on to other, hopefully, interesting topics. And Cheryl, if you think of other things that we haven't covered today, please make notes of them. If you're game for coming back, we'd love to have you back.
I'd love to. That'd be great.
Okay, that sounds like a winner. All right. Thank you so much, and go with the gods. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Shamanic Voices. Please like and subscribe so that you won't miss our coming episode, where we always try to have engaging and interesting topics and or guests. Thank you, and go with the gods.